It is the All-Star break, a perfect time to look back at the 2005 World Series title run. Let's discuss what it was like to cover that team with my guests next on Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast. Well, I'm on vacation right now, and with the 20th anniversary celebration of the 2005 World Series just happening, let's discuss what it was like to cover that team with CHSN's Chuck Garfien, WBBM's Rob Hart, and SouthsideSox.com's Brett Ballantini. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, so Chuck, I believe 2005 was your first year with the team's television broadcast. In your wildest dreams, did you think this team would win the World Series?
I mean, looking back, no, I did not expect it. Certainly in the start of the season, they were coming off an 04 season that was okay. It was not what anyone hoped for. They underachieved. They dealt with some injuries. And then if you go back to that off season, they acquire Scott Podsednik. They trade away Carlos Lee, and they signed Jermaine Dye. That seemed to be a good move at the time. A.J. Brzezinski was very controversial. So there was not a lot of buzz about the White Sox at the start of the 05 season, certainly in the spring training, that anything special was coming. But I will say, and then they signed this Japanese infielder named Tadahito Waguchi. So many questions about that team going into the year, but then they get off to this great start and they're just winning games, close games, playing great team baseball. And, you know, I remember around the end of April, there was a feeling of, wow, there's something going on here, but will this team win a World Series? I didn't feel like they had a legitimate shot probably until the middle of the season, just because you don't want to make any drastic conclusions after a couple of months. But as the season went on, and we can get into how things kind of were starting to fall apart in the end of the regular season, but as the season wore on, I had a feeling like, well, they have a shot, and no one expected that at the start of the year.
Yeah, I thought, I remember being furious that they traded Scott, for Scott Podsednik, just because I had covered the Brewers that year. And I was like, oh my gosh, Scott Podsednik was coming off a miserable year. Like I was working at the flagship radio station, and it was so bad that they actually asked us to pull highlights of him having good at bats so he could listen to himself. This was what his psychologist wanted, so he could listen to himself have good at bats again. Like, that's how bad it was getting for him. So I was like, oh man. But I remember even my uncle, who was a diehard Sox fan, he's like, it's going to be okay. And then when they played the Dodgers, I think that Dodger series is what convinced me that, hey, they could do this. But then, as you said, things fall apart. And it was like going into the playoffs, I'm like, well, here we go again. There's a potential that they're going to choke it. I don't know if you got that same feeling.
No, because what happened was it wasn't so much that the White Sox were playing so poorly at the end of the year. The Cleveland Indians, as they were known at the time, were just red hot. And so they were just gaining on the White Sox. And that was part of it. They had a 15.5 game lead or 15 game lead. They went down to a game and a half. I believe that's what it was. And I think once they clinched, and then they went to Cleveland and they swept them. And Cleveland still had a shot to get in. And the White Sox just, once the Sox won the division and all that pressure was gone, I think that really got them, that kind of recalibrated things for themselves to be like, okay, we've got our bearings. We got the division. We're in. We know what this team can do. Now let's beat the snot out of the Red Sox, the defending champs. So we're going to show everyone that we're more than what people might even be thinking, because the Red Sox were the defending champs. They were expected to beat the White Sox, and they got swept in 3.
Yeah, and absolutely crushed. And why do you think that this 2005 run doesn't get romanticized like the 2004 Boston Red Sox or even the 2016 Cubs? Because it was one of the most dominant runs to a championship. I mean, they absolutely stomped the Red Sox. beat the Angels in one of the most impressive starting pitching displays, and then just roll through the Houston Astros.
Todd, I think you know the answer. You know the answer? You want me to say it?
Did it not exist?
No, they're not the Red Sox. They're not the Cubs. They're not getting all that publicity from like national media. It's the White Sox. ESPN would like overlook them like they didn't even exist. There's nothing I can do to change that. Nothing you can do. It's just out there in the ether. And for whatever reason, they do not get the respect that they deserve. 11-1 in the playoffs. They knock out the defending champs, right? 4 straight complete games in the ALCS. This like needs to go into Cooperstown if it's not there already. And then they face the Astros. They sweep them. This is one of the best postseason runs in modern baseball, and they don't get enough credit. But you know what? Why am I having all this angst? It's ancient history. I don't care. It happened. You know it. I know it. And if the national media doesn't want to get behind it like they should, so be it.
Yeah, I think that would be the 30 for 30, that this actually happened type thing. I know the Sox are doing their documentary, and I know a lot of people have done other stuff, but it's like it happened, and it happened in the most impressive fashion ever. Now, you've also been a lifelong fan. Before 2005, it was getting to the point where a World Series win, did it seem impossible, especially after the 94 strike just wipes out the World Series? Because it looked like the White Sox were going to win it that year.
I mean, yeah, it looked like they had a great shot. They in 93, they lost in the ALCS. 94, they were great, but the Indians were really good. So were the Expos. So you didn't know how it was all going to play out. But yeah, that 94 team was special. And that is a season that will always be what if, like what could have been. We'll never know the answer to that. And I do that 94 team, and the season that Frank Thomas was having was very, very special.
Yeah, I'm going to die on the hill that they would have won in 94 just because that was.
You never know. How could you say that? It's the playoffs. You never know. There could have been a team sneaking in and they get hot. They could have won, but who knows? Who knows?
So, and Chuck, this is why you're one of my favorite, White Sox personalities. Is you're always the realist. Yeah, and sometimes the optimist. You're such a good balance of that, and I'm not sucking up to you because you gave me enough. You're giving me some time. It's just you are one of my favorite White Sox personalities. What was your favorite moment from that run?
Wow, favorite moment. Favorite moment. I mean, them winning it. That's number one. From a reporting perspective, I can give you this, and I've told this before, just because it came from the heavens, so to speak. So it's before Game 3 in Houston. And, I'm someone who I like when everyone is zigging as a reporter, I like to zag. I want to find something that no one else is doing or think of something that no one else might be thinking of. And so it's before Game 3, and I have to do a story for before the game. And the story that I come up with is, you know what? I'm looking around the clubhouse. There's Jeff Blum. There's Willie Harris. Neither of them have had a sniff of an at-bat in like 3 weeks. And what if they are called upon in the final 2-3 games, however is going to be left in this World Series? What is that going to be like? What kind of preparation are they doing? So I interviewed Willie Harris and Jeff Blum before the game, and I'm sure people were like, why is Chuck interviewing them? They probably are wondering, why are we being interviewed? We are so not the story right here. But I thought that was interesting. And then, sure enough, 5 hours later, Jeff Blum hits the game-winning home run in the 14th inning to beat the Astros in Game 3. And then Willie Harris scores the only run in Game 4 as the White Sox won the World Series. Am I a genius? No. Did I get lucky? Yes. But that's one of my favorite, moments from working.
Let's get Rob Hart's memories when he covered the team for WGN next on Locked On White Sox. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. FanDuel's traditional money line, spreads, and over-unders, they're fun to play, but I always maintain, if you want to win big or at least double or even triple your money, then go with FanDuel's parlays, props, and futures. For example, Detroit and the Dodgers, they're the favorites to win the World Series, but you can still get them at a plus number. The Dodgers is still at a number where you could double your money if they go all the way, and the Tigers is at a number where you can make some nice coin too. You could also still put some money on the Cy Young or MVP race at a good number, depending on who you go with. They even got good numbers on pretty much every team except the Dodgers when it comes to who will finish with the best record in baseball. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms, so make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. And let's jump into Rob Hart's memories of when he covered the 2005 World Series when he was with WGN Radio.
I was on the job. I was at work. I had just started because you and I were together at WTMJ in Milwaukee, and I left the radio station October 7th of that year. That was my last day at TMJ, which was also the day the White Sox finished the sweep of Boston of the El Duque game at Fenway Park. I had my going away party from TMJ that night, and then I started at WGN. I hope I hope no one's listening, but I started at WGN the following week. So my first day at GN was the day they finished the sweep of the Angels in Anaheim. And I was at Jimbo's when they clinched the American League title with a bunch of other TV reporters and a bunch of other radio reporters. And so when they won the World Series, I was at, again, working for GM. They said, go down to Bridgeport, make sure you're there with all the fans. And I was at the late, great Punchinello's at 31st and Princeton, which I think has been renamed 2 or 3 times since then. But that was the only bar that was still letting people in that night because everybody else was at capacity. Jimbo's, Bernice's, like all the other places in Bridgeport were full. And then when they won, everybody left Punchinello's and walked over to the ballpark, and people were holding up brooms, and it was kind of starting to rain, as I recall. So yeah, that was one of those nights I will never forget as a sports fan or professionally.
So what was the craziest man on the street interview that you got when you were covering it for GN?
Honestly, it wasn't too over the top. Everybody was very happy, of course, and everybody, people from all walks of life were meeting in front of the ballpark, and everybody was they were all in a good mood. I think that was the one thing that I recall. Now, I tried to get back to the expressway, and because I was, I just moved back from Milwaukee, so I was living at my parents' house in Beverly until I could find a place. And I remember trying to go south on Halstead and being stopped by a bunch of people who were partying in the intersection at 31st. And I thought, I'm going to be one of those guys on TV where the crowd of people jumps on top of their car. But the light turned green and they let everybody go. So that was nice. And then I went down to Western Avenue and to see how things were unfolding in Beverly. And that was a little crazier, as I recall, because I was phoning reports into WGN. And of course, Steve King, and Johnny Putnam were on the air as the overnight hosts at GN at the time. And they were doing a lot of coverage. David Kaplan was calling in. We had Mike Farron now with MLB Network on Sirius XM. He was down in Houston with the team, and I'll never forget this. So I was doing a scene setter from Beverly outside of Cork and Kerry on Western Avenue, and the first thing that happened was someone shot off a full-blown 4th of July mortar. It was the loudest firework I'd ever heard, ever. And then then they said, Steve and Johnny were like, well, we have to let you go because Mike Farron managed to get Steve Perry, who was with the team with the White Sox because of Don't Stop Believing. So I got bumped for Steve Perry. And I guess if you're the lead singer of Journey, you're allowed to do that.
All right. So would you rather have been in Houston covering the game, or would you rather have been, down in Bridgeport in the parking lot, where everybody's celebrating and, having a good time celebrating?
Well, I think it would have been two different. It would have been two different experiences. I mean, if you're down there in Houston celebrating with the team, you're with the players, you're with the VIPs, you're with White Sox fans who made the journey to Houston to watch them wrap it up. But I think I got enough. It was a fan story as much as anything else because for everybody who was watching that, for White Sox fans, I mean, this was something they had never experienced before in their lives, unless they were like 105 years old and were around for 1917. But many people were not. So this was. It was interesting to see how White Sox fans were reacting. It was interesting to see, a lot of family stories were being told, and it was just like I said before. I think it was a night where everybody was the same, and it didn't really matter who you were or where you were from. You were a White Sox fan, and you were invited to the party. So that was just a cool thing to observe.
Yeah, if I recall, my grandpa was 3 years old in 1917. He was still alive in 2005. But he had switched allegiance, obviously, to the Cubs because he believed cable, television should be free, and he never forgave Reinsdorf for that. But yeah, he was 3 years old, and then obviously he died the next year. So that was the only Chicago World Series he ever saw. So that was a neat thing about that World Series is for some that was all they ever got to see. And whether you're a Cub fan or White Sox, that was it in Chicago. That was finally breaking that curse.
Yeah, that would. I mean, you have to understand that the last one before 2005 was 1959, and then the one before that was 1945. That was the Cubs' last appearance, and then of course the last World Series title the city had experienced was 1917. And as someone who has the 2005 World Series commemorative DVD like committed to memory, I believe it was one of the newspaper reporters who said that. Chicago had last thrown a World Series before they had won one. So that's how monumental of an occasion that was back in 2005.
I'm glad that you brought up your time with TMJ because you're at the flagship when Scott Podsednik is clearly struggling. I know you were in the news department. I was doing more sports, political stuff, but I remember Scott Podsednik was struggling so bad that I believe they approached the director of network operations to say we had to get like highlights for Scott Podsednik to remember how he could hit. And you wanted to hear Bob Uecker, but how surprised were you when Scott Podsednik goes over to the White Sox for Carlos Lee and not only plays well, but he was like one of the catalysts for that team to win the World Series.
Now, this is going to have a lot of like inside WTMJ baseball, but we have to take it back to December of '04 when that trade took place. And I seem to remember sitting in the newsroom on Capitol Drive at TMJ, and you may remember Rich Bakken, who was
Yeah.
another White Sox fan who was on the staff at the time, and he came up to me and said, "What are they doing?" I think the takeaway was like that was a trade that clearly benefited the Brewers more so than the White Sox, and you would I think the belief was at the time that probably the White Sox were rebuilding and that they were moving Carlos Lee out uh, to get prospects, and then Scott Podsednik was the add-in, and I think it was kind of surprising, all of a sudden he turns into Ricky Henderson, with Ozzie Guillen in Chicago in the early going in '05, and really was a tremendous table setter for that team. And this was during the regular season. I mean, I think, he lives in White Sox immortality because of that home run in Game 2 of the World Series. But he was just like, he was the speedster. He was the guy who set the table for grinder baseball and get him on, get him over, get him in. But when that trade happened in December 2004, if you told anybody that would be the end result, that would be like the most wishful fan thinking, and it came true that year.
Yeah, because I remember I think the other reason why the Brewers made the deal was they wanted to get a name because Mark Antanasio had just bought the team, and I know he wanted to make a big splash. And then I believe, they getting Jose Vizcaino too. I remember like the going more inside baseball. I remember when I worked at the Miller Park scoreboard, we called him Gas Can
Oh
because
yeah,
anytime he
yeah.
came on, he was
Gene Miller called him El Gasolino. That was, I mean, yeah. Everyone thought like, what's going on here? And um, that 99 times out of 100, that 2005 team wins like 75 games, but that one time out of 100, they win 99 in a world title.
All right, I got to ask. I've been asking everybody that's going to be on the series. Do you think the White Sox will ever win a World Series within, say, the next 25 years? I know it's very hard, but in your gut, what do you think?
Crazier things have happened. I think you got to start now. You got to start laying the groundwork now. But there are more opportunities today for a team to try and get into the postseason. And once you get in, you can't really control what happens after that. So it's certainly possible. 25 years, 2050, that's 25 years from now. Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. But as we've seen with some other teams who haven't won it all at all, like the Milwaukee Brewers or the Seattle Mariners or the San Diego Padres, you can go 50 years without winning one. So I'll say it's definitely possible, but I wouldn't put money on it.
And let's get Brett Ballantini's memories of covering the White Sox after the break on Locked On White Sox. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as the show is available on all major podcast platforms. Brett Ballantini, he covered the White Sox before he went to SouthsideSox.com. So let's get his memories of covering that World Series run. Now, you've covered championship teams. You were covering that team too, if I recall, if I read your bio right. What was it like to cover that championship team compared to, if I recall, you covered the championship Bulls, right?
Yeah. The White Sox, again, my first experiences in being in that press box as opposed to NBA. So, I mean, it was sort of a magical time. Got my, made a connection with Scott Reifert, who was running the communications there, still does, to get some work in the program. I mean, everything really came together. I mean, I had a story in the World Series program, Todd. I mean, come on. I mean, not just a dream season as a fan, a dream season professionally. And, just such a loose clubhouse. You had this variety of guys. I wanted to get over to talk to Tadahito Oguchi, though, of course, you're talking through a translator, but just his generosity and his spirit, Jermaine Dye, sort of this quiet, heroic guy, both on the field, but for even showing up for the White Sox. He got an offer that was better, after he agreed to come to the White Sox and still decided to honor that. I mean, there was character on that team, that was rare enough to see them, really weather anything. And then you've got Ozzie leading the charge, and whatever a character you want to ascribe to Ozzie, he's real and he has his guys' backs. And I don't think we can overlook that as a, game 1 to game 162 and onto the playoffs, never looking back team, because his confidence, I mean, I think the players fed off of as well.
All right. Before the postseason, though, I want to take some people behind the scenes. Because I only got to cover Ozzie one time. I was up in Milwaukee, but was he still doing the season where he had the unofficial press conference where he would just, have the most profanity laced stuff where nobody was allowed to record. Nobody was allowed to record. I remember that. I remember Scott Merkin, at least in Milwaukee, being the gatekeeper. Like, I'll tell you guys. Like, I remember him being like, "I will tell you guys when to hit record," right. And Ozzie would go off and then he would have the official press conference. Was that still going on? Because that was the thing that I loved when I heard about that, was like, this is how you cover Ozzie Guillen.
Yeah. Easier to do. And I think happen more frequently on the road, because you've just got less attention. In Chicago, particularly in that season, you're getting, 50, 100 people perhaps in the dugout to talk. But yeah, Ozzie in the manager's office, pregame, postgame, depending on how things went, not always maybe in the mood to talk or talk long. Of course, those are usually the best things to hear, as you say, a lot of profanity. But yeah, with a guy like him, it's sort of always a thing. And, you could be just sitting, in spring training, just like watching a B game, and, you're going to get some interesting stuff, because, Ozzie's sort of never off. I mean, particularly when you get closer he gets to a baseball diamond, he's never really switches off. So it's always entertaining. But yeah, you have to handle it responsibly. I myself have plenty of recordings that would be a lot of fun to hear if I could share them.
Yeah. And I don't remember what player he was talking about that was accusing him of playing more Latino players, but I remember him just saying, well, that guy's playing better. And I think that was around the time when either Chris Getz or Josh Fields was on the team. So I don't know where he was adding at, but I remember that was the rant that you could not record on. But I just remember being in his presence. And I almost had to hold back my fandom at that time because he helped lead one of the greatest moments. I mean, because obviously he didn't play, but a lot of it was a lot of his philosophy, his personality. And that's one of the greatest moments ever, because there are a lot of people, a lot of men and women in pine boxes that never got to see what we saw. And it was like, I don't know, like how you as a Sox fan, I know you're a professional journalist at the time, but how did you contain yourself to be like, oh my gosh, thank you for this moment?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you have to, you get those. I mean, especially when you're covering closely enough, and you're always there, and you're almost getting tired of each other because you have to see each other so often. Of course, you are able to have those more private moments where you can make that connection. But yeah, more or less, I mean, you can't fanboy on a daily basis. So you have to pick your spots, I suppose. Especially, when you have to cover. I mean, it would have been a challenge in 2005, and I'm not really sure how many critical storylines you would need to do covering day after day in 2005, because there wasn't a ton to pick on. And if anything, they were, sort of cell phones or self errors, because, this team was never out of first place. Subsequent years, of course, there were, a lot of gaps in the greatness of the team. Still a winning team under Ozzie, more or less, but, you have to be able to ask the tough questions too. So it's a challenge, but thankfully he made it comfortable for most. If you came with sort of the real attitude, he read what you did, he saw how you behaved, and if it's past his muster, which I don't think he had a high bar, past that muster, then I think it's like, okay, this guy's doing his job. I'm pretty sure Ozzie knew I was a Sox fan. Certainly the whole beat got on me because I was the only Sox fan, and they're like, no cheer in the press box. I'm like, wait, I'm a White Sox fan. Have you met any of us? We're harder on the team than any of you. So there was never really a challenge of cheering in the press box, because you're always picking on the little thing. It's like, come on, damn it, wrap this thing up already. Come on, they're supposed to sweep come on.
Now, I want to just quickly go back. I know you were the one that was, again, just saying, I'll take this, like just beating the Red Sox. And I like that, because one of the things that I remember priding myself on, it's good to know that I wasn't the only one, was just trying to be humble, because I remember Cub fans in 2003. I was in college too. I was at Marquette University. So, you got a ton of Chicago transplants just telling me how bad the White Sox were because they didn't make the playoffs, and the Cubs, by 2 more games in a weaker division, got in, and they were like, oh, it's in the bag. I remember that. It's in the bag, Wood and Pryor. And I remember just being absolutely terrified that the White Sox were going to lose after, the whole thing. How superstitious were you? Because I swear, I think I promised to God that I named 6 children after certain Sox players.
I can't wait to meet the family. Yeah. I don't want to admit it now because we want to be cool. And of course, the Cub post is like, you guys don't even matter. Yeah, right. But a big part of wanting to win, maybe the only part of wanting to win a playoff series, wanting to beat Boston, was to say the White Sox could be the first team to win a playoff series. That was significant. The crosstown rivalry is real. We have 2 teams in this city. That's not a common occurrence anywhere. Some people, even Sox fans, want to tell you it's not real. And of course it's different now. Both teams have won a World Series. The Cubs had a great run that, yielded just the one World Series. The White Sox, didn't even, get there. So they didn't do anything with their titles, but they have them. So the whole temperature of it has changed, but that was huge. 2003 was terror. Don't you think I haven't kept the phone message from my Cubs fan friends who called from the game saying, we're going to the World Series. What was that, game 6? We are going, book it. Oh yeah, I kept it. Oh yeah, they've heard it since, because, of course that rivalry's, still there. It does change temperature, and maybe a much younger fan now who maybe wasn't even around for either one of the World Series might feel differently. But back then, man, that was heated, and that was a huge part. I would say the primary, if not the exclusive part, of wanting to win that series. Of course, you want to see your team do well, but you also sort of want to be first. And this was the opportunity coming 2 years after the Cubs caved, all that just made it a little sweeter.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with another edition of this 2005 World Series Look Back. We'll go over how it was like to follow the team if you were not in Chicago. Feel free to share your memories of the 2005 World Series run at the episode page on YouTube, X formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with another edition of this 2005 World Series Look Back. We'll go over how it was like to follow the team if you were not in Chicago. Feel free to share your memories of the 2005 World Series run at the episode page on YouTube, X formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow.